David and Caroline Fields had always been a couple with contrasting yet complementary interests. David, a pragmatic engineer, spent his days designing complex systems. Caroline, on the other hand, was an artistic soul. Her love for history had manifested in a unique hobby, collecting old photographs of cities as they had appeared decades or even centuries ago. Caroline's collection filled shelves in their study, each album meticulously organized by city and year. She would spend hours researching, scouring online forums, and visiting antique shops to find rare images. "It's like seeing a time machine," she often told David, her blue eyes lighting up as she explained the stories behind each photo. David admired her passion, though he didn't entirely understand it. "You and your old pictures," he'd tease affectionately. "At least they don't take up as much space as my tools." They laughed, but in recent months, the laughter in their home had grown sparse. A distance grows. After 12 years of marriage, cracks had begun to show. David's work consumed him, leaving little time for anything else. Long hours and frequent travel made their once vibrant connection feel like a fading photograph itself. Caroline, feeling neglected, threw herself deeper into her collection. Her evenings were spent poring over online archives or chatting with fellow enthusiasts in niche forums. It was during one of these late-night exchanges that she first encountered Nathan, the intriguing stranger. Nathan appeared as a friendly stranger in an online photography forum. His messages were polite and engaging, his knowledge of historical photography impressive. "I've got a small collection myself," Nathan wrote in one exchange. "A few rare shots of New York in the early 1900s. I'd love to share them with someone who appreciates their value." Caroline's interest was piqued. Rare photos of New York were a treasure trove for her collection. Their conversations became more frequent, shifting from public threads to private messages. Nathan's charm and enthusiasm for their shared hobby were intoxicating, especially for Caroline, who felt increasingly invisible in her own marriage. A dangerous invitation. After weeks of messaging, Nathan suggested meeting in person. "I've got some photos I'd rather show you in person," he wrote. "They're too valuable to risk scanning and posting online." Caroline hesitated, but the allure of rare photographs was too strong to resist. She rationalized the meeting, convincing herself it was purely about her collection. "I'm meeting with someone who's got old photos of New York," she casually mentioned to David one evening. David barely looked up from his laptop. "Sounds nice. Just be careful." The meeting. Caroline met Nathan at a quaint cafe downtown. He was charming and disarmingly easy to talk to, his passion for photography matching her own. They spent hours discussing their collections, and Nathan revealed a small album of photos he had brought with him. Caroline was captivated by the images, rare, beautifully preserved snapshots of a bygone era. As the meeting stretched into the evening, Nathan suggested walking to his nearby apartment to see the rest of his collection. "I promise it's worth it," he said with a smile. Caroline hesitated but agreed, her excitement clouding her better judgment. The betrayal. What began as an innocent visit quickly turned into something else. Nathan's charm and attention filled a void Caroline hadn't even realized was there. Caught up in the moment, she let her guard down, and one impulsive decision led to another. When she returned home later that night, guilt weighed heavily on her. David was asleep, oblivious to the betrayal that had just occurred. Caroline told herself it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment that would never happen again. Guilt and paranoia. Over the next few weeks, Caroline's guilt festered. She avoided Nathan's messages and threw herself back into her collection, trying to bury the memory of her infidelity. But David began to notice changes in her behavior. She was more withdrawn, her cheerful demeanor replaced with tension and distraction. "Everything okay?" he asked one evening as they sat in the living room. Caroline forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all." David nodded, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. The discovery. One afternoon, while Caroline was out running errands, David decided to tidy up the study. As he rearranged her albums, he noticed an unfamiliar notebook tucked between two shelves. Curious, he opened it and found handwritten notes, details about Nathan, their meeting, and even fragments of messages they had exchanged. The final pages described the night she had gone to his apartment, the details vague but damning. David felt his stomach drop. His hands shook as he pieced together what had happened. The confrontation. When Caroline returned home, she found David in the study, holding the notebook she had carelessly hidden. Her heart sank as she saw his expression, a mix of fury, betrayal, and heartbreak. "What is this?" David asked, his voice trembling as he held up the notebook. Caroline's face went pale. "David, I can explain." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't lie to me. I read it, Caroline. All of it. Nathan, the photos, the everything." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I made a mistake." David's laughter was bitter. "A mistake? Sneaking off to meet another man, lying to me, betraying our marriage. That's more than a mistake, Caroline. I didn't plan for it to go that far," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "But it did," David said coldly. "And now I'm left wondering if anything we've built means anything to you." The emotional fallout. The days following the confrontation were filled with silence. David moved into the guest room, unable to sleep beside Caroline. The tension in the house was palpable, even though their two children, Emily and Noah, remained blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding. Caroline tried to apologize, but her words felt hollow to David. Every time she attempted to speak, he would cut her off or leave the room. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Caroline approached David in the guest room. "David, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, but I love you. I want to fix this." David looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You can't fix this, Caroline. You destroyed us. Do you even understand what you've done to me?" Caroline burst into tears, but David turned away, unwilling to let her see the depth of his pain. Doubts and questions. David couldn't stop replaying the details he had read in Caroline's notebook. The thought of her with Nathan filled him with anger and humiliation. He began questioning everything. How long had she been dissatisfied? Was this the only time she had cheated? One night, David confronted her with these questions. "Was it just Nathan?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Or have there been others?" Caroline shook her head vehemently. "It was only him. I swear." David's skepticism was evident. "And why should I believe you? You've lied to me for months." Caroline's voice broke. "Because I'm telling you the truth now." But David wasn't sure if he could ever trust her again. A shattered collection. Caroline's collection, once a source of joy and pride, became a painful reminder of her betrayal for David. The albums that filled their study now felt like symbols of the lies she had told. Late one night, as David stared at the rows of neatly organized albums, an idea began to take shape. If Caroline had destroyed their marriage, he would destroy the thing she valued most, her collection. The first strike. The next day, while Caroline was at work, David went into the study. He started with the albums from her most treasured city, New York. He pulled out the photos one by one, ripping them in half and tossing them into a trash bag. When Caroline returned home, she immediately noticed the empty shelves. Panic set in as she rushed to the study, only to find David standing amidst the wreckage of her collection. "What are you doing?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. David looked at her, his expression cold. "You destroyed something I loved, Caroline. I'm just returning the favor." Caroline fell to her knees, sobbing as she tried to salvage the torn photos. "Please, David, stop. These mean everything to me." "They meant everything to me, too," David said, his voice dripping with bitterness, "until I realized they were part of the lies." Desperation and begging. Caroline spent the next few days trying to piece together what remained of her collection, but the damage was irreparable. Her once pristine albums were now scattered fragments, and her heart broke every time she looked at the ruined photos. She begged David to stop. "You've made your point," she said one evening, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please don't destroy any more." David's expression softened for a moment, but then he shook his head. "You didn't stop when you were hurting me, Caroline. Why should I?" Seeking redemption. Caroline realized she couldn't undo the past, but she was desperate to make amends. She started attending therapy, hoping to understand why she had risked everything for a fleeting connection. "I felt invisible," she admitted during one session. David was always busy, and Nathan made me feel seen. Her therapist nodded. And do you think that justifies your actions? No, Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. I destroyed the man I love. I destroyed myself. David's turning point. Despite his anger, David found little satisfaction in his revenge. Watching Caroline's pain only deepened his own, and he began to wonder if destroying her collection was truly helping him heal, or simply prolonging their mutual suffering. During a late-night conversation with his best friend, Ethan, David admitted his doubts. I thought it would make me feel better, David said, staring into his drink, but all I feel is empty. Ethan sighed. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, man. It just makes them bleed longer. A tentative peace. One evening, as Caroline sat in the study, surrounded by the remnants of her collection, David walked in. I'm done, he said quietly. Caroline looked up, her eyes red from crying. What do you mean? I'm done destroying things, David replied. This isn't fixing anything. Caroline nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. The aftermath of revenge. The days following David's decision to stop destroying Caroline's collection were filled with an uneasy quiet. The physical act of tearing apart her passion had brought no solace, and the weight of their crumbling marriage loomed heavier than ever. Caroline made small attempts to bridge the chasm between them. She would cook his favorite meals or leave short notes on the counter apologizing again and again. But David remained distant, his heart guarded. One evening, after dinner, Caroline approached him cautiously. Thank you for stopping, she said softly. David didn't look up from his book. I didn't do it for you. Her shoulders slumped, but she nodded, understanding that his pain was far from healed. The children began to notice. Emily and Noah, their 2 children, began sensing the tension in the house. Gone were the days of family movie nights and laughter at the dinner table. Instead, their home was filled with strained silence and whispered arguments. Is everything okay with you and Dad? Emily, the older of the 2, asked Caroline one evening. Caroline's throat tightened. Your dad and I are going through a tough time, sweetheart. But we both love you and your brother very much. Emily nodded, but her eyes betrayed her worry. I just want us to be happy again. Caroline hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. A glimmer of understanding. David began attending therapy sessions of his own, encouraged by his best friend, Ethan. Though initially skeptical, he found the sessions surprisingly cathartic. You've been through a profound betrayal, his therapist, Dr. Martin, said during one session. But revenge doesn't erase pain. It often amplifies it. Have you thought about what you need to move forward? David sighed. I don't even know what moving forward looks like anymore. Part of me wants to fix things for the kids, but the other part, I can't forget what she did. Dr. Martin nodded. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding how much power the past will have over your future. Caroline's redemption efforts. Caroline threw herself into repairing what little trust she could salvage. She stopped contacting Nathan altogether and even deleted the accounts she had used to engage with him. She also began rebuilding her collection, not as a distraction but as a form of therapy. Every photo she found became a reminder of what she had lost and what she hoped to regain. One evening, she approached David with an envelope. These are the notes I've been writing, she said. I thought you should have them. David hesitated before taking the envelope. I'm not ready to read these yet. That's okay, Caroline replied. Take your time. An unexpected twist. One day, while scrolling through his email, David received a message from a name he hadn't expected, Nathan. The email was brief and unapologetic. David, I heard you've been having a rough time since finding out about Caroline and me. I just wanted to let you know, people like her always come back to people like me. Best. Nathan. David's hands trembled with rage as he read the message. The audacity of Nathan to intrude into their lives again reignited the anger David had worked so hard to temper. Confronting the past. Unable to let Nathan's taunt go unanswered, David decided to respond. His reply was measured but firm. Nathan, you don't know me, and you clearly don't know much about Caroline. Whatever satisfaction you think you're getting from this, Let me assure you, it's hollow. Stay out of our lives. David. Nathan didn't reply, but the exchange left David seething. He realized that as much as he wanted to focus on healing, the unresolved bitterness still held him captive. An olive branch. As the months passed, the tension in the house began to thaw, though just barely. David and Caroline maintained a civil coexistence, mostly for the sake of their children. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Caroline approached David with a hesitant smile. "I know things are still hard," she began, "but I wanted to share something with you." She handed him a photo, a newly acquired image of their city's downtown from the early 1900s. David stared at it for a long moment. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I wanted to remind you of why I loved this hobby in the first place," she said. "It's not just about the photos. It's about preserving something meaningful." David didn't respond, but he placed the photo on the coffee table instead of discarding it. A turning point. David's therapy sessions began focusing on closure, not necessarily forgiving Caroline, but finding a way to let go of the anger that consumed him. Sometimes, closure isn't about the other person, Dr. Martin said. It's about deciding that their actions no longer define your happiness. Inspired by these words, David started journaling, pouring out his thoughts and frustrations onto paper. The act was both painful and liberating. The choice. Eventually, David realized he had a decision to make. Continue living in the shadow of Caroline's betrayal or find a way to reclaim his life. He called Caroline into the living room one evening. "We need to talk," he said. She sat down, her face etched with nervous anticipation. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you again," David admitted. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you either." Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes, David. I just want a chance to rebuild what we had." A fragile truce. David's admission marked the beginning of a tentative peace between him and Caroline. While forgiveness still felt distant, the raw anger that had consumed him began to ease. They agreed to focus on co-parenting and creating a stable environment for Emily and Noah. Caroline, grateful for the chance to rebuild, took small but consistent steps to regain David's trust. She was transparent about her actions, shared her therapy progress, and invited David to join a couples counseling session. "Even if it's just for the kids," Caroline said one evening, "I think it might help us learn how to communicate again." David hesitated but agreed. "I'll go, but don't expect miracles." Couples therapy. Their first couples therapy session was tense. Dr. Elena Shaw, a soft-spoken but firm therapist, guided the conversation with measured questions. "David," she began, "what do you feel when you think about rebuilding trust with Caroline?" David sighed, his arms crossed. "I feel like it's impossible. Every time I look at her, I remember what she did." Dr. Shaw nodded. "That's understandable. Trust is built over time, not overnight. But it starts with small actions. Do you think Caroline has shown any signs of change?" David glanced at Caroline, then reluctantly nodded. "She's trying. I'll give her that." Caroline looked at him, tears in her eyes. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm willing to work for it, as long as it takes." Nathan resurfaces. Just as the healing process began to take root, an unwelcome reminder of the past reappeared. Caroline received an email from Nathan. "Hey, Caroline. I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you want to meet up sometime." Caroline felt a chill run through her as she read the message. She immediately deleted it, knowing that responding would undo everything she was trying to repair. But her guilt gnawed at her. Should she tell David? Would he see her honesty as a step forward, or as another reason to doubt her? Coming clean. That evening, Caroline decided to tell David about the email. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice unsteady. David set down his book, his expression guarded. "What is it?" "I got an email from Nathan," she admitted, her hands trembling. "I didn't respond, and I deleted it. But I thought you should know." David's jaw tightened. "When did this happen?" "This morning," she replied. "I didn't want to hide it from you." David stared at her for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you for telling me. But if he contacts you again, I want to know immediately." "You will," Caroline promised. A confrontation with Nathan. David couldn't let Nathan's interference go unchecked. Armed with Nathan's contact information, David sent him a message of his own. "Stay away from my wife and my family. This is your only warning." Nathan's response was flippant. "Relax, David. I was just saying hi." David's anger reignited. He blocked Nathan's number and forwarded the email to their attorney, documenting the interaction in case it escalated further. "This ends now," David muttered, determined to protect the fragile progress he and Caroline had made. Building new foundations. Over the next several months, David and Caroline continued couples therapy, slowly rebuilding their connection. There were setbacks, arguments sparked by old wounds, moments of doubt, but they kept showing up for each other and their family. One breakthrough came during a session when David admitted, "I'm tired of feeling angry all the time. It's exhausting." Dr. Shaw encouraged him. Letting go of anger doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing peace for yourself. Caroline reached for his hand, and for the first time in months, David didn't pull away. A test of trust. Their progress was tested when Caroline received a message from an antique photography dealer about a rare collection going up for auction. "This could be a big deal for my collection," Caroline told David, "but I wanted to ask how you feel about it first." David studied her carefully. "Why are you asking me?" "Because I want to make sure you're comfortable," Caroline replied. "I don't want to do anything that would make you doubt me again." After a long pause, David nodded. "Go for it, but keep me in the loop." Caroline smiled, relieved. "Thank you." A family vacation. As their relationship improved, David suggested taking a family vacation to the mountains, a place they had loved visiting before the affair. "This could be a chance to start fresh," David said. Caroline agreed, and the trip was filled with moments of genuine connection. Hiking together, laughing over campfire stories, and sharing quiet sunrises. One evening, as they watched the stars, David turned to Caroline. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you, but I can see that you're trying, and I appreciate that." Caroline nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'll keep trying, for as long as it takes." A new normal. By the end of the year, David and Caroline had settled into a new rhythm. Their marriage wasn't the same as it had been before the betrayal, but it was stronger in some ways, rooted in honesty and mutual effort. Caroline's collection, once a symbol of division, became a shared passion. David began helping her organize and research, using his analytical skills to complement her creativity. For the first time in years, their home felt like a place of healing instead of a battlefield.